Got it. Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this official side event at the UNFCCC Bonn Climate Conference. This event is called Unpacking Freshwater's Role in Climate Mitigation. It's organized by my organization, the Stockholm International Water Institute, SIWI. SIWI is absolutely pleased, delighted, honored that together with our partners, GIZ on behalf of BMZ, the Potsdam Institute, the Stockholm Resilience Center, and the UNDP SIWI Water Governance Facility, that we can bring to you today our executive summary, an exclusive preview of our upcoming report on water mitigation, which is going to be called The Essential Drop to Reaching Net Zero, Unpacking Freshwater's Role in Climate Change Mitigation. We're also pleased to bring to you the key messages, our highlights, after 2 years of quite rigorous and state-of-the-art research on water's role in climate mitigation. My name is Jennifer Jun. I'm a Senior Manager for International Policy at SIWI, and I will be co-moderating this event today alongside my colleague Malin Ingemarsson, who is with us virtually. And what we will do is I will moderate kind of the in-person component of this event, and she will help moderate the virtual speakers, the virtual audience that is joining us via YouTube today. I should also mention that Malin is our lead person at SIWI on the upcoming report, so she has really done a fantastic job of bringing the project together, and we're really thrilled to share more details on that later today. We'll first turn to Malin to introduce the report and an overview of today's event. But first, before I do that, let me share with you some brief housekeeping remarks. So first, for those of you in the room, please do take your time to mull over questions you might have as you listen to our speakers, and there will be a Q&A that we'll conduct towards the end of the session. I have a microphone that I'm happy to pass around for those questions. For the audience joining us online, please do feel free to drop your questions in the chat box that you'll be able to access in the virtual platform. So please feel free to do that throughout the session. Also a reminder for all of our speakers, we do have a hard stop time at 2:45 p.m. So please make sure that you stay as close to the schedule as possible. And now it's a pleasure to turn to my colleague Malin to introduce the report and an overview of the event today. Malin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I hope you can hear me well. Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Most welcome to all of you joining us, both in Bonn, of course, and online. My name is Malin Lundberg Ingemarsson, and I am so very excited about today's session, because now we can finally share some exclusive previews of this massive work that we have been conducting over the last 2 years, compiling the latest science on links between freshwater and climate change mitigation. At Stockholm International Water Institute, we have been participating in these UNFCCC climate conferences for quite many years now. And I believe it was in 2018, during COP24 in Katowice, where we, together with our partner organizations, discussed the lack of focus and information on water and climate mitigation. Because as you know, water has a quite prominent role when it comes to climate adaptation, but that is rarely the case in climate change mitigation. And in Katowice, we decided to do something about that knowledge gap. And we started working on the study to identify links between freshwater and climate change mitigation. And we did that together with Stockholm Resilience Center, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, GIZ, and the UNDP SIWI collaboration Water Governance Facility. And now we can finally share some findings from the report, and it's called The Essential Drop to Reach Net Zero, Unpacking Freshwater's Role in Climate Change Mitigation. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here you can see the structure of the report. It's divided into 3 parts. Part 1 gives a background, both a physical science background as well as a governance background to climate mitigation links to water. And then in part 2, we identify high potential water-related mitigation opportunities across sectors and biomes, as well as water-related risks to be avoided in climate mitigation planning to prevent uninformed or unsustainable greenhouse gas mitigation planning. And in part 3, we draw cross-sectoral conclusions building on the findings in part 2. We identify priority risks and opportunities for water-wise climate planning. And we also explain how integrated approaches are required to account for this interconnectedness between freshwater and climate mitigation. Next slide, please. Here, this QR code, it gives you access to the report's executive summary and key messages. And I think there is also a few printed in the room if you would like to find it and access it later. And this will link you to a SIWI website where you can find the executive summary. And yeah, I am really very honored to share this moment with all of you. And I'm especially honored to be able to welcome the many distinguished guests that we have with us today. And with that, I think it's time to get started. So I would like to hand over to Jennifer June to introduce the first speaker.
Thank you so much, Malin. We're really pleased to have a distinguished guest with us. I'll introduce her very briefly. She's the Deputy Director General for Global Health, Resilience, and Equality of Opportunity for BMZ, the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, Dr. Tania Rödiger-Vorwerk. Please come to the podium. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. A difficult name. So, welcome, dear attendees of the Bonn Climate Change Conference. At the Bonn Intersessional, we are laying the groundwork for the success of the COP27. And therefore, it is so important to talk about water and mitigation today. Adaptation and mitigation need to go hand in hand. The importance of water for adaptation is undisputed. As we like to say, water is for adaptation what energy is for mitigation. However, adaptation and mitigation are complementary strategies, and rising temperatures create boundaries to adaptation action. So in that, actually, mitigation cannot succeed without water, since mitigation measures in key sectors depend on and/or do impact water. Let me give you some examples. Firstly, water availability is essential for energy production and transition. So low-emission energy options like hydropower, bioenergy, and the thermoelectric energy generation all requires water to move turbines, grow crops, or for cooling. Ecosystems like forests or wetlands can absorb and store large amounts of carbon. So wetlands, you know this, contain 30% of the world's species, and peatlands as the world's forests, peatlands, for example, store twice as much carbon as the world's forest, while only covering 3% of the Earth's surface. They are important biodiversity hubs and can even protect us against flooding and landslides and drought. So in that, BMZ, my ministry, acknowledged the importance of healthy ecosystems through its One Health approach and the launch of a new initiative area, restoration and nature-based solutions. So working on the One Health issue, we have started and we have a new organizational part established the beginning of this year. One example of fostering healthy ecosystem is PROPIT. The PROPIT project in Indonesia, which aims to revitalize peatland ecosystem through capacity building, policy advice, and integrated land use planning. It contributes to increasing productivity and income, and among other things, to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So mitigation cannot succeed without water. We must consider and seize the water sector's large untapped mitigation potential. So 2 examples for that. In Jordan, for example, energy is generated almost entirely from oil and gas. The water sector is with 15% the country's largest energy consumer. So therefore, the BMZ finances interventions to enhance energy efficiency, which lead to a 20 to 25% reduction of electrical consumption in the area of interventions. Similar interventions are supported in Peru, Costa Rica, Morocco, and Tunisia. Second example, in addition, the sanitation sector is key. Expansion of sanitation access and improved wastewater management and treatment towards circular systems that reuse, recycles water and wastewater can not only reduce emissions, but also protect water quality, biodiversity, and human health. For example, BMZ supports the improvement of the economic and ecological sustainability of sludge management in 3 selected locations in Jordan. To come back to my first argument, the Bonn International laid the groundwork for success at the COP27. Taking a closer look at this groundwork, 2 things become very clear. Firstly, decisive action is urgently needed in our race against the clock to reduce emissions, reach the 1.5 or the 2.0 goal, and prevent devastating consequences for people and our planet. And secondly, mitigation cannot succeed without water. We cannot risk endangers our water security in the pursuit of emission reduction, and we cannot leave any mitigation potential untapped. So we need to be both carbon smart and water wise when taking decisive action now to accelerate our mitigation efforts. So thank you all for your attention, and I'm looking forward to an insightful session and your contributions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vorwerk, for that very powerful endorsement, loud and clear, of water's role in mitigation, and especially for the clear examples from the country cases that you mentioned, ranging from Indonesia to Jordan. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to a message that we have from the UNDP, from Dr. Pradeep Kurukula Surya, who is the Director and Executive Coordinator of Nature, Climate, and Energy.
First, a warm welcome to everybody. I'm really proud to join the launch of this important report that unpacks freshwater's role in climate change mitigation. UNDP really welcomes this opportunity to co-author and co-partner and co-develop this extremely timely report, which partners at SIWI and PIC, SRC and GIZ, as well as my colleagues in UNDP have collaborated on. The report finds that many of the transformations needed to reach climate emission neutrality depend on A, the reliable access to fresh water, and B, these will have significant impact on water resources and ecosystems that depend on them. The Earth's climate, as we all know, the water cycle, the Earth's climate systems, these are deeply intertwined. Water management is the foundation of successful mitigation action, but it's also critical to ensure that mitigation is done effectively. But this is often overlooked. The water sector is often underleveraged and underinvested on. Now, as countries urgently take mitigating actions to address the climate crisis, it is vital that these actions are properly taking into account water resources and their needs, and are implicitly as well as explicitly accounted for. Mass afforestation, renewable energy targets, these cannot be addressed without taking water resources into account through connections to hydropower and biofuels. Competing priorities and trade-offs need to be accounted for. If not, we will only jeopardize the success of climate interventions, but even more so, will compound climate-related risks on water security and by extension on development. Now, this report identifies 4 opportunities for investment and action that benefit both water security and climate change mitigation. What are they? First, we need to see the promotion of sustainable, low-emission water management practices. Climate-smart water management, for example, represents a significant untapped mitigation potential. 2, we need to prioritize investment in nature-based solutions for climate action that also help mitigate water security risks. 3, we need to support countries to navigate water-wise energy pathways. 4, we need to accelerate circular solutions and sustainable lifestyles. Now, UNDP is very proud to partner with a number of you to actively promote nature-based solutions through our flagship programs. One of these is the Climate Promise, which is currently supporting more than 120 countries with the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And UNDP wholeheartedly supports an integrated, inclusive, and risk-informed approach that properly accounts for the vital importance of water in evaluating and delivering effective climate solutions. And these solutions must be just and sustainable. So, as we prepare for COP27 in Egypt this year and COP28 in the United Arab Emirates in 2023, we expect to see an increasing focus on and a call for far more proportionate investment in adaptation, including within that integrated measures to address water security. This report makes it clear that this journey towards climate security requires massive cross-sectoral efforts in improved management of water resources. It rightly places importance on integrated approaches and system-wide solutions to effect the transition that is necessary. We hope that the guidance and lessons that emerge in this publication will help us as all to implement the NDCs more successfully. And I look forward to speaking more on this topic with many of you over the coming months. This is a critically important time to get it right, and getting the planning right for water as a foundation of our ambition on climate impact mitigation is critical for today's discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that insightful and supportive intervention, Dr. Kurakula Surya. It is now my pleasure to welcome my dear colleague, Dr. Lan Wang Erlandsson from Stockholm Resilience Center. Lan is very involved in the water and climate mitigation study and has been part of the report's core group from the very start. Lan will present some findings from her recent study on how freshwater change is now beyond planetary safety limits, and she will link that to the findings in our upcoming report. Lan, I have enjoyed so much working with you on this project. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Malin. It's been a pleasure to work with this report and honor to be here. My name is Lan Wang Allensen. I work as a researcher and team leader at Stockholm Resilience Center in the Planetary Boundaries Research Lab in the project Earth Resilience in the Anthropocene. I would like to emphasize, as previous speakers, that the Essential Drop report comes at a very critical moment of time. It's really timely. The mitigation measures are now rolled out across land and ecosystems at the same time as we are feeling the brunt of climate change, more than ever. In our most recent research, we find that pressures on freshwater are now so widespread and severe that they threaten the resilience of our one and only planet. Next, please. Climate change, land use change, pollution, and multiple other human pressures now lead to drought, flooding, water quality problems, and acute water scarcity for both human use and ecosystems. This includes compromising the ability of our natural systems to continue to store and sequester carbon. This unprecedented and simultaneous change in water, land, and climate present also unprecedented challenges to our civilization today. Next, please. Modern humans, we have existed for a long time, for 100,000 years, but agriculture and the civilizations as we know it only started to thrive as we entered the relatively stable Holocene started 11,700 years ago. Next, please. But now, as we are increasingly departing from the known conditions of the Holocene, and we are entering unknown territory. In our recent analysis, we find that soils are now abnormally dry or wet over larger land areas than has been the case for over 100 years during the pre-industrial and mid-Holocene period. The historical period that we had access to. Next, please. These changes in soil moisture, we can also see them observed elsewhere. They are also manifested in increased water extremes. In the latest IPCC report, we saw that heavy precipitation in the upper figure and drought in the lower are found to increase in all regions of the world. It's no longer an isolated case. Next, please. Climate action absolutely cannot succeed without water because water is simply a fundamental part of life on Earth, metaphorically the bloodstream of the biosphere. Next, please. Water is not just water for the Earth system. It is also the moisture, the vapor that form clouds that rains out and blocks the sun's radiation. It is also an energy flow that changes temperatures, changes circulation, wind patterns, that has the ability to delay our monsoon that are so critical for agriculture in India and many other parts of the world, and much, much more. Even a simple diagram of water's interactions with other components of its Earth system, as we see here, it looks excruciatingly complex. Next, please. So as an example of water's role for the carbon cycle, we know that freshwater is also an enabler of photosynthesis that allows life on Earth, on land, to thrive, and that allows carbon to be bounded and buried. Those water change, it also risks reverting our land carbon sink to source and obstruct sequestration. Next, please. In fact, observations that we have today already show that carbon sink strength seems to peak all across all tropical forest systems in Africa, in Amazon, in Southeast Asia. And in fact, the Amazon forest might very well reverse to a net carbon source. So instead of helping us to absorb our emissions, it might instead release more carbon into the atmosphere. And this might happen already within the next few decades. Whether these forests will revert to carbon sink to source depend on our actions to protect the remaining forest. Next, please. And to mitigate climate change-driven fire and drought. Next, please. Under severe climate change, in the lack of effective mitigation, the majority of what today constitutes Amazon risks losing its resilience due to severe drying, because Amazon forest supplies so much of its rainfall to itself. Next, please. Forest loss tend to cause more forest loss in a self-amplifying manner through the water cycle, followed by drought and fire. Next, please. In fact, overall, we find that this kind of self-amplifying feedbacks that are mediated with the water, they occur across all forest types, peatlands, permafrost, drylands. There are also stabilizing feedbacks in the Earth system. For example, the higher atmospheric concentration of carbon also allow for higher biomass production because plants become more water efficient. But it seems that these are also saturating, notably in the tropical forest because of soil moisture stress. So overall, it seems to us that potentially the amplifying feedbacks are not dominating over the stabilizing ones. Next, please. Moreover, there is also the concern that self-amplifying feedbacks that result in tipping of an entire system, such as Amazon forest dieback, can, through cascading teleconnections, further predispose other Earth system elements to tip. Next, please. Given the departures from the past known and the worrying signs of self-amplifying feedbacks, we provisionally propose as a sixth boundary. The water is a sixth boundary to be transgressed in the planetary boundary framework, which together define a safe floating space for humanity. Next, please. Achieving the Paris Agreement goal requires very steep cuts in emissions, while retaining both biosphere carbon sinks and creating new ones through land use and engineering means. All of these measures uses and impacts water, regardless if you're talking about preservation and restoration of ecosystems or more technical ones or others. Next, please. The challenge here is that we now need to be very effective and ambitious and swift in the climate actions, while still accounting for and planning for that water perturbations are already over us, they're already taking place. And the climate mitigation cannot afford to degrade water cycle further. Our different perspectives in the local and global scales must meet to allow for win-win, so that a functioning water cycle can benefit both climate, nature, and people. Next, please. Thank you so much for your attention. If you have any further questions, comments, please feel free to contact me at lan.su. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lan, for that very informative presentation. I'm thrilled to now present. Actually, I'm just going to give him a quick heads up. He's right outside the meeting room. He's the UNFCCC Deputy Secretary, Executive Secretary, Mr. Ovais Sarmad. So I'll be right back. Thank you for your patience. He's on his way just now. Oh, you have the podium.
Oh gosh, already. Hi. Good afternoon. Sorry, I hope I'm not late and I didn't keep you waiting. It's a pleasure for me to be here on behalf of the Secretariat to welcome all of you to start with, and I hope you're having a productive session at the subsidiary body meeting of our process after a gap of 3 years. So it's a pleasure that you're here, and hope, as I said, it'll be a productive meeting for all of you and interaction And the bottom line is that we all succeed in addressing the existential challenge that we are all facing. So to start with, to thank the Stockholm International Water Institute, UNDP, and the German Federal Ministry for Development for organizing this event, and to provide our perspective. Because from our perspective, the key role of freshwater in climate change is extremely important. A few days ago, as many of you might have been already also, I was in Stockholm with some of you about the importance and talking about the importance of strengthening synergies in cross-sectoral collaboration between all stakeholders to keep the Paris Agreement's goal of 1.5 degrees within reach. And all actions and all initiatives, sectors have to contribute to that, towards that. So this report launched today is an excellent example of that, and we must put the planet on a path to driving emissions down with mid-century net zero commitments and ambitious 2030 emissions reduction targets. No one can be left behind, and it's crucial to work together to increase the ability of all to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience. Stronger and more ambitious climate action, including through climate-sensitive water infrastructure establishment, watershed management, and fulfillment of water nexus needs such as food, energy, health through and inclusive partnership, which is inherent in the Paris Agreement. The Glasgow Climate Pact, adopted in COP26, highlights the urgency of scaling up action and support to strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerability to climate change. This is extremely crucial in implementing the Paris Agreement, because now we are in full implementation phase of the process. And as you all know, the 6th IPCC assessment report has a few water-related references with a strong focus on mitigation measures regarding water security and the need for climate solutions to address water risks. The report also underscores water's role as an enabler for climate change mitigation across sectors. In this context, it is essential to implement climate mitigation as soon as possible, especially through cross-sectoral and holistic approaches and policies as well as solutions. This includes water sector and all other sectors that depend on water for mitigation. The implementation of Paris Agreement requires inclusive, economic, and socially transformative, and transformative is really the operative word here, solutions based on best available science. Some pathways include strengthening the nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans. Priorities that countries need to lay out include freshwater resources as a priority area, and measures for enhancing availability, efficiency, and quality of water supplies, including enhancing or building water infrastructure and water resource plans, strategies, and systems. Efforts to promote transboundary water management and cooperation. And that is happening in many parts of the world, but we need to keep that really high on the agenda, because water will become a significant issue. Furthermore, the global stocktake will take place, as you know, in COP28 in 2023, and that is a very good opportunity to identify successful examples from various stakeholders and evidence of water and water for climate mitigation, as well as to pinpoint the gaps and opportunities for water to play a transformative role in climate mitigation. This may leverage other multilateral, international, and regional processes. So in conclusion, dear friends, stronger and more ambitious climate action, including by taking mitigation measures on water security through inclusive partnership, is inherent to the Paris goal. And once again, I'd like to thank all of you, to the organizers and to my colleagues in the Secretariat for supporting this event. Thank you. Any thoughts, questions, or suggestions, please, now or later. We'll be more than happy to listen to you and continue to work jointly together. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarmad, for those inspiring remarks. I'll turn it back over to Malin, who's with us online.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you, Mr. Sarmad, and to the UNFCCC for those important remarks. Now we will introduce the first preview of the report, and that is the chapter on mitigation measures in drinking water and sanitation services. So I welcome my colleague from SIWI, Dr. Rödiger-Vorwerk, who is part of SIWI's Department for Water and Sanitation. Please, Ricard.
Thank you, Malin. Thank you, Jennifer. And of course, thanks for allocating one slot to talk and discuss about the mitigation potential of water and sanitation services. It's a pleasure to be here today. And of course, just to highlight from the very beginning that what I'm going to present is the findings from the chapter, as Malin has mentioned. But yeah, highlighting the contribution of many authors to this chapter. I'm here today on behalf of all of them. But of course, I mean, different people have participated, have reviewed the chapter. So I think that basically what I'm going to convey here today is the key messages. So next slide. I would like to start highlighting what we do know and what we do not know yet in terms of what are the total contribution from the water and sanitation sector to greenhouse gases emissions. So basically, it's difficult today to predict a total figure in terms of what's the total amount of greenhouse gases that that are emitted from water and sanitation services. Some studies highlight that this could be between 2 and 5% of total greenhouse gases. But again, there's a lot of uncertainties, and I'll get back to these uncertainties later today in the presentation. What we do know, and there's a study from Kripa et al., is that when it comes to analyze the contribution in terms of methane and nitrous oxide, is that the total contribution from wastewater treatment processes is around 12% and 5% respectively. But what we've seen is that this proportion is increasing and has been increasing for the last 30 to 40 years. There is also some kind of mitigation impact, not only from wastewater treatments, but also from decentralized sanitation. This, of course, in terms of magnitude, a lower amount, but it's important to have them also into consideration because, of course, there's a huge amount of people accessing to these sanitation solutions. So it's estimated that around 1 to 2% of current methane emissions comes from decentralized solutions. But again, here, the uncertainty of these figures is high. I would also highlight that there's, of course, a kind of not only direct emissions, but indirect emissions. We know that producing water, producing and treating wastewater consumes a huge amount of energy. And of course, depending on the energy source, the total amount of CO2 emitted can be considerably high. And just to say that this amount of energy consumed is expected to increase by 50%. Then it's of course clear that this sector can contribute to mitigate greenhouse gases emission. And I'm going to explain, in the next slide, a few initiatives that are in place today to start moving into this direction. Next slide. In relation to what has been done and what can be done to reduce direct greenhouse gases emissions, here you can see some initiatives, some alternatives. One mitigation option could be to start modifying and control the operational conditions in the wastewater treatment plants. This should be the most efficient way to reduce greenhouse gases emissions in wastewater treatment. And particularly one key solution here would be to better control the aeration strategies in the biological reactors. However, of course, this is not always possible because there might be some operational limitations in the installed units. Then another solution could be to apply new treatment processes. One option here, for instance, is to use microalgae for the reactors, for the biologic reactors. But of course, here again, we might face some challenges when it comes to land requirements that can hamper the solutions in specific contexts. Another potential solution could be to capture this biogas and valorize and, of course, try to produce energy from this biogas. A nice case study here could be, for instance, the one from Siracusa in Peru, who basically reduced the amount of CO2 emitted per year with more than 500 tons. There is also the possibility to capture biogas at the household level from decentralized solutions. But here again, the risk here is that there might be a significant leakage from poorly maintained systems. So this potential solution needs to be very well implemented. And then there is, of course, the option to implement decentralized sanitation solutions, such as composting toilets. These solutions would add to other beneficiaries, such as advantages such avoiding groundwater pollution. But of course, to implement properly these solutions, we need to better understand which is the mitigation potential of these solutions. And then, of course, maybe face other additional challenges, such as cultural aspects that can hamper the implementation in place of these sanitation technologies. In the next slide, I'll try to highlight also some solutions and actions that can be implemented to reduce indirect greenhouse gases emissions. So basically those that are related to the high energy consumption in wastewater and water treatment plants. First is to conduct an energy audit to better identify which are the areas of inefficiency and also to try to point out to potential saving opportunities. There is, as I've mentioned before, the opportunity to improve the aeration control systems. And for instance, there's a case study here in Sweden where a wastewater treatment plant reduced by more than 15% the total amount of energy consumed. Then there is also, of course, the opportunity to enhance and improve the pumping operations. There is also the need to reduce the non-revenue water, because this is, of course, impacts on the overall performance of water utilities. And just to highlight that in some utilities, this non-revenue water can amount to more than 50%. Use of renewable energies. Of course, if we use renewable energies, the total amount of CO2 emitted can be reduced up to 100%. And then try to achieve also energy neutrality. And I would like to highlight here that, for instance, there's a case study in Jordan where the water utility could, through the sludge treatment and the production of biogas from the sludge, could reduce in more than 80% the total amount of energy used in that wastewater treatment plant. So again, there's a lot of mitigation opportunities here that could be taken into consideration and that have been implemented to a certain extent in different case studies. And then just to complete my presentation in the next slide, just to highlight some challenges that we need to take into consideration and potential key messages that highlight the way forward. As I've said, there is data gaps that hamper us to better understand which is the mitigation potential from the sector. We need to, through better research, through more reporting and accounting tools, better understand what is the total contribution from centralized and decentralized solutions. We also need to make sure that this evidence is well embedded in policies that refer to climate and to the waste sector. So making sure that this total contribution is well integrated in the climate and waste policy debate. And finally, for the waste sector, we need to make sure that when we submit climate proposals, the waste contribution is clear so that they can be, of course, or they can have a better chance to be funded. When it comes to the way forward, as I've said, we need to increase the evidence. We need to enhance policy making, making sure that the key messages are there. We need to incentivize investment and make sure that when we expand water and sanitation coverage, we do this through climate resilience waste solutions. And we finally, of course, need to to gather the momentum by establishing climate platforms that strengthen cooperation between climate and waste stakeholders. These should be the key messages that I would like to highlight today. I'll give back to you, Malin, in case there is any further comment at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ricard. Following that, Ricard, you mentioned a case from Jordan, and now we will present more from that. It's a case study, a video message from Jordan on their work with the NDCs. So here is a video message from Nadine Gantus, and she is a technical advisor on water and sanitation with a focus on climate change and sludge management at GIZ. Please, Nadine.
Hi, I am Nadine Gantus, working with the GIZ as technical advisor in water and sanitation, focusing on climate change and sludge management in the water sector in Jordan. Our work focuses on increasing awareness on how to manage climate change impacts in the water sector, not only through adaptation measures, but also through mitigation measures, considering that the water sector is heavily energy intensive in its operation through water and wastewater systems. Climate change in Jordan can be felt and seen through the changes in temperature, whether they are warmer summers, colder winters, less rainfall, or more heat waves. This definitely impacts the water sector. Since its first NDCs in 2015, Jordan has focused on mitigation measures in the water sector, even without having a dedicated chapter on the matter. In 2021, when Jordan updated its NDCs, it increased its ambition targets from 14% to 31% reduction in GHG emissions. With its commitments to contribute to climate change mitigation, Jordan has focused on several actions, including increasing the share of energy efficiency and renewable energy projects to 9% in different sectors, focusing on reporting and monitoring different projects under the NDCP action plan, as well as having a strong MRV system in place for GHG registry that is up to international standards. This puts Jordan as the first developing country to do so, allowing it to be a front runner when it comes to tapping into mitigation potential in the water sector. The project that I work on is a global project called Water and Wastewater Companies for Climate Mitigation, or WACLIM. It is funded by the BMUV as well as the EKI initiative. The WACLIM project has been in operation in Jordan since 2016, focusing on mitigation measures in the water sector, which is identified by implementing energy efficiency pumps in 2 different pump stations. One happened to be in 2019, which achieved a total energy saving of almost 2 gigawatt hour and a reduction in CO2 emissions by 44%. The second pump station is planned to take place in this year, in 2022, with an estimated total energy saving of 1 gigawatt hour annually. The project also implemented the ECAM tool, or what is known as the Energy Performance and Carbon Emission Assessment and Monitoring tool, supporting users to monitor energy performance and greenhouse gas emissions. This, with several training sessions, have supported the water staff or water utility staff in allowing to properly assess the operations of their utilities and report and link to water-related NDCs. All in all, the WACLIM experience shows that the water utilities have a substantial impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and supporting the water sector in improving its operations. Therefore, showing also the importance in the link of and prioritizing actions according to NDC priorities. Moreover, other related projects that are also supported by the BMZ in Jordan have been through developing the renewable energy and energy efficiency policy for the water sector in 2020 to 2030 with a proper action plan, as well as installing an energy management system to support utilities in properly assessing the utility performance in terms of energy. Moreover, other projects such as the Sustainable Sludge Management and National Water Master Plan have been major milestones in the water sector to drive innovation forward. Through the various international support, and specifically through the German government, the GIZ is supporting the water sector in Jordan in implementing technically sound solutions to address the rising challenges of climate change through mitigation measures and adaptation measures. This goes hand in hand with national policies and commitments that Jordan has announced. With the support from BMZ and BMUV, the water sector will be able to face these challenges head on and improve its conditions for a better and sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine, for that very interesting insight into Jordan's work under NDCs. Now we will have another preview from the report. This is the chapter on mitigation measures in freshwater ecosystems. I here welcome Noreen Faiza Anisha. She is conducting her PhD studies at the Oregon State University. Please, Noreen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Malene. Hello, everyone. I'm Noreen Faiza Anisha, doctoral candidate at Oregon State University. I am leading one of the chapters in the upcoming report on unpacking freshwater's role in climate change mitigation. And in the chapter that I worked on, we discussed the need to include freshwater systems in our journey towards net zero. Next slide, please. It is scientifically established at this point that freshwater ecosystems can work as greenhouse gas sources and sinks. Hence, they have a role to play in our journey towards net zero emission. But some aquatic environments like rivers, lakes, and reservoirs have been largely excluded from that conversation. So in this presentation today, I'm going to give emphasis on the role of river, lakes, and reservoirs in greenhouse gas emission reduction, and in what measures should be taken to integrate river, lake, and reservoir-based emission reduction actions? What are the co-benefits that come with those measures? And lastly, like moving forward, what can we do and what approach should we be taking? Next slide, please. So in the recent years, natural inland water systems have gotten increased attention, particularly wetlands, different kinds of wetlands, peatlands, and blue carbon ecosystems, and rightfully so, because they are important natural capitals that are greenhouse gas sinks when preserved in healthy condition and can become a major source of greenhouse gas emission when disturbed. It is important that they are taken seriously. But what we have missed is probably our rivers, lakes, and reservoirs. So do we really know our rivers, lakes, and reservoirs well? Do we know how much they emit? And do we have any particular method in place to estimate their emission? Do we clearly know what conditions make them a sink or what conditions make them release the greenhouse gases? The thing is, we have left out an important part of our freshwater system in this discussion, and as they are important, and they're important because they can be sinks and source both, based on how they're managed, and they are important for net zero goal, and that's why I'm emphasizing on the rivers, lakes, and reservoirs in this presentation. Next slide, please. Coming to the rivers, river systems can store a significant portion of terrestrial carbon. Rivers emit, but also sequester. For example, carbon sinks within Amazonian floodplain may exceed rates of emissions from the river system. But rivers around the world are also increasingly recognized as a significant source of greenhouse gas emission. And although there is still no coherent and generalized knowledge available to explain rivers' emission and how to minimize emission from the rivers in the world, there are some observations, common in several studies, like nutrient loading and organic matter delivery due to human activities or sometimes even natural causes are observed to be making the rivers saturated with carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. On the other hand, the river floodplains are major sinks of carbon, and their carbon storing capacity is being affected by human activities such as disconnecting the floodplain from the channel, changing flow regime, etc. In summary, climate change mitigation through rivers entails understanding of two aspects. One is the carbon storage and next slide, please. So how well do we know our rivers? Well, There is a substantial knowledge gap regarding river-based emission reduction. Firstly, the carbon storage in the river system. There is no global scale comprehensive understanding of how riparian modification impacts carbon dynamics in the river systems, nor do we have complete understanding of the mechanics of the carbon fluxes and their transformations in the river systems across the world. And secondly, about the emissions, there is evidence that, clear evidence that rivers are emitting greenhouse gases, but there is no concrete organized knowledge about the drivers of emission, the patterns, the variability. And firstly, because we have very small number of observations about rivers and their emissions. Secondly, there are few studies that explore the emission of all three major gases. We need to know how all the three major gases are emitted together in different rivers. Also, different studies use different techniques to estimate the emission and have varying upscaling method. Recent studies on greenhouse gas emission from rivers and streams are revealing emission rates are way higher than what it had been previously estimated. So there is indeed substantial work left to be done regarding river-based emission estimation. Next slide, please. So based on whatever knowledge we have on river-based greenhouse gas emission, there are certain measures that we can take at this point. Firstly, limiting anthropogenic activities like disconnecting floodplain, channel alteration, flow regime change. Also, nutrient loading and organic matter control can bear results. Also, we need to broaden our understanding of the rivers. Their emission depends on geography, geology, temperature, climate, surrounding vegetation, human activity in the periphery. So management should be in a watershed scale and definitely be context specific. There is absolutely no one-size-fits-all solution, and the approach should be tailored to context. Next slide, please. Now about the lakes and reservoirs. Some researchers consider lakes as the new sink because the organic carbon is more efficiently preserved in their sediments than any other depositional environment. Nonetheless, the nutrient-rich water, nutrient-rich as in when there is more nitrate, phosphate, sulfate go into the water, it makes the water prone to eutrophication, which is a huge concern right now for lakes and reservoirs since it has a positive feedback loop with climate change, meaning that freshwater eutrophication and GHG emission are strengthened by each other. The schematic diagram right here explains the positive feedback loop. You can have a closer look at it when you have access to the slides. A big part of the eutrophication is the nutrient loading, which predominantly comes from human activities in the periphery, like agriculture, sewage, grazing, industrial waste, etc. Next slide, please. Reservoirs too can be greenhouse gas sink in several cases, but most recent studies suggest that reservoirs are a net source of carbon or greenhouse gases. In fact, hydropower dams have been under much scrutiny over the last decade over the discussion of whether or not they can be considered clean energy source, since dam-based reservoirs emit globally significant amount of greenhouse gases. And the greenhouse gas emission are mainly generated at the construction and maintenance stage. Eutrophication, again, is a concern for reservoirs. On top of that, the drawdown area where the dam release water, sediments are exposed to the atmosphere, which makes the drawdown area a hotspot for carbon dioxide. Next slide, please. This is a diagram that shows how, the emission pathway changes when a dam is put on a river. And, before a dam is put, the emission pathways are much fewer than when there's a dam on a river. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So how well do we know? I think we have to go to the previous slide. So yeah, how well do we know our lake reservoir-based emissions? Well, there is no standardized or widely accepted method for GHG emission estimation for reservoirs and lakes. In fact, lakes and reservoirs, although they are actually different in their characteristics for some reasons, there's a similar methods used to estimate their greenhouse gas emissions. And there are very few studies that explore the emission in all three major greenhouse gases with the least number, and we have the least number of data points for nitrous oxide. And additionally, there are uncertainty regarding land management change, climate change, and socioeconomic change that might affect the nutrient loading on the lakes and reservoirs. And these uncertainties make estimation of future greenhouse gas fluxes much difficult. Next slide, please. So about the mitigation measures, just like rivers, nutrient and organic matter control help with nitrification management. There's technology of methane management that can be utilized for reservoir particularly. It is definitely the time that we rethink of hydropower plant as clean energy source. A lot of this dams are being removed across the world, and dams always have a limited lifespan. So when we conceptualize new dams, we need to rethink it as a, and reconsider whether it should be considered into, our clean energy or not. Dams being removed, in every century is not a good news for global carbon budget in a sanitorial scale. Next slide, please. So I have summarized all the co-benefits in 3 subcategories. First one is the enhancement of ecosystem services. The mitigation measures like nutrient loading and organic matter control, ensures clean water, which is enhanced ecosystem service. And then measures like connecting floodplains to rivers can help with flood risk reduction. Mitigation measures in freshwater system provide adaptation benefits, which we discuss in detail in the chapter. Many of the mitigation measures can aid in providing nature-based solutions, which we also discuss in detail in our chapter. The next slide outlines the nature-based solution benefits. And when you have access to the slides, you can have a closer look at it. Next slide, please. I think we can skip that. Next slide. Thank you. So moving forward, emission reduction services from river systems, lakes, and reservoirs need to be included more commonly in emission reduction portfolio, in addition to the different wetlands that we are increasingly doing. And for that, we have to broaden our understanding of these ecosystems and their greenhouse gas dynamics. Natural climate solution schemes should be designed with the full range of ecosystem services in mind, alongside carbon sequestration. And this requires integrated, coordinated approach for land management, restricting nutrient loading, maintaining and improving hydrologic connections. And while we do this, we have to also keep future climate change scenarios and socioeconomic changes in mind. That's all from me right now. Thanks a lot for your patience, and your questions are welcomed.
Thank you so much, Noreen, for that super informative and interesting presentation. Now it's time to open up for questions from the audience. So we will do like this. If you are at the session in Bonn, please raise your hand so that Jennifer can hand over a microphone to you. And if you are participating online, please write your question in the chat so that I can ask those questions from you to the presenters. We will start with a question for Lan, if that's okay, Lan?
Yes.
Super. So Noreen gave us insights to the mitigation potential of freshwater ecosystems. Can you perhaps name some of the most important mitigation measures in land systems?
Yes, so the IPCC report, the latest one, lists some of the most, in that order, the most important mitigation measures in land systems include reduced conversion of forest and other ecosystems, and in second, carbon sequestration in agriculture, and third, ecosystem restoration, afforestation, and reforestation. All of these have huge mitigation potential, but also have uncertainty, so partly because of the water cycle, in uncertainty in the future trajectory of the water cycle. And another demand side mitigation measure is the shift to a balanced, sustainable, healthy diet that will also have implications for many other systems beyond the land systems. Helps.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Lan.
And Malin here in person. I have a question from the audience from Ingrid Timbo of Agua.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Malin. This might actually be a question for Jennifer or Malin, potentially, or any of the other panelists. My name is Ingrid Timbo, Policy Director at the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. Really excited to see this report. And we're here in Bonn at the SBs, and we're also there's the global stocktake that's going on, there's defining the global goal on adaptation, there is a lot that's happening, but a lot of the things that we work on are reporting with parties. And so I'm wondering if anyone has seen any examples from the updated NDCs or from the NAPs of these types of interventions on water and mitigation included, and if there are any good examples that you could share from those reports. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid. Malin, do you want to take a stab at this question?
I can, absolutely. Do we have one of the other online presenters that have some examples from that you would like to share? Otherwise, I can jump in with a few. Then I continue speaking. We have a colleague, David Hebert Coleman, who has conducted a study on the water in the NDCs. And he has told me that there are, in the updated NDCs, water has a more prominent place than it had before. For example, in wetlands is mentioned a lot when it comes to mitigation, but much of the water is in the adaptation parts of the NDCs, even if those interventions many times also are climate mitigation or positive for mitigation. And there is many technical solutions also that are mentioned within water systems and so on, as Ricard mentioned. So it's there. It's better than it was, but it can absolutely be even better in the future. So it's really needed that we support countries in bringing water into their NDCs even better. Thanks so much for the questioning.
Malin, and I have someone in the audience who would like to add perhaps to that question. We have Dr. Jyrker Tammelander from the Ramsar Secretariat.
Ah, nice.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity here. So we have in the Glasgow Pact a really clear recognition of nature in achieving climate goals and especially the mitigation targets. And at the same time, water is quite absent in the Glasgow Pact. I think at the beginning of the session here, we said something about the need for getting water more centrally into the climate discourse. And similarly, the water ecosystems more centrally into climate mitigation actions. So in general, I wanted to hear if you have any reflections on the means by which you can move forward under the climate process. Of course, the global stocktake being one critical process, but there might be more opportunities. So any thoughts and views on that would be very interesting to hear. I also wanted to share that in the context of the Convention on Wetlands, there's obviously a lot of focus on this, and already 2 COPs back, I believe, the parties adopted resolutions that recognize the role of water ecosystems, of wetlands in climate change, and encouraged parties to update their wetlands inventories in order to better account for carbon fluxes and storage. So you have a intergovernmental agreement or an intergovernmental process effectively calling for further action on that, and then further integration of such action into NDCs. So there's a good basis for that also outside the climate process, or a good basis for leveraging action taken outside the climate process before achieving climate objectives, and maybe there can be more effort in leveraging that to achieve and track climate progress. And last point on that is, of course, relation to particularly important systems. We've heard really interesting information about the knowledge, the state of knowledge, the uncertainties we face, and then there's also a lot that is known and actionable, and peatlands come to mind, where the 1.5 degree aspiration or target is not really achievable without re-wetting peatland at an extraordinary scale. Probably half of the drained peatland needs to be re-wetted by 2030 in order to maintain any hopes of achieving 1.5, and that translates to more than 2 million hectares per year between now and 2030. So a huge scale. How do we get there? Thank you.
Malin, that was a very rich set of questions and also information from Dr. Tamelender. Do any of the panelists online want to take a stab at any of those three questions? We'll turn to the virtual panelists first.
I saw Noreen, you raised your hand before. Is it possible to pass over the word to you?
Yeah, sure. I was first hi to Ingrid, who is an ex-colleague. Great question, actually. I was looking at the our report has a part, the chapter that we drafted has a part where we actually address what the latest NDCs look like for wetlands and for freshwater-based ecosystems. And I looked at that there are countries now who are actively looking to use wetlands as natural sink and and enhance their functions. Not always they're saying that, we are going to use it for greenhouse gas emission reduction. Sometimes it is for adaptation, but it made place in their NDCs. So the review that we did of NDCs was as latest as last March. So we have put some examples there. About the peatland wetting, because we talk about it very much about the measures in our chapter too. I think looking at the NDCs, whereas it's very positive, increasing number of countries putting wetlands and freshwater systems, peatlands, blue carbon ecosystems in their NDCs, but if the numbers is still not very high, I think it always kind of starts with having the right policies in place, giving the attention and addressing the problem first. There is one example I came across when I was writing the chapter. There was an example of Chile, who actually had several environmental, regulations and laws and legislations in place to protect their ecosystem. And that actually eventually reflected in their NDCs too. And it was kind of a continuation of all the measures, policy level measures that they had taken in the past decades. And I think, I think that's a good starting point, because a lot of countries started with big ecosystems, started with nature, which is a very umbrella term, and then eventually, kind of broke it down to, okay, nature means we're looking at biodiversity, we're looking at terrestrial ecosystem, we're looking at water ecosystem. And I think, that's what I kind of think at this point, looking at not so many of the countries having wetlands or freshwater system in their NDCs, but increasingly we are having more countries including wetlands and water systems in their NDCs.
Malin, are there any other panelists online who would like to address any of the other questions?
I don't think so at this moment.
In that case, maybe Dr. Tamelender, I can take a stab at the first question you asked about kind of raising the profile of water and awareness of water in these COP processes. I think, certainly we can look to aiming to see water land in the COP cover decision, for example. Should there be a Sharm el-Sheikh declaration to finally see the role of water in climate mitigation as well as adaptation and resilience building? I think that would be an extraordinary, ambition to go after. And I also want to take advantage of the fact that I'm really pleased to have someone from the Marrakesh Partnership Secretariat here. This is the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action. And that basically is a platform that can really attest to all of the actions and ambitions of non-party stakeholders who are doing good work. There are initiatives, there is progress on the ground taken on water for climate. So I'm just gonna pass the microphone over to Tama Takao from the Secretariat to speak a little bit about the Marrakesh Partnership.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's pleased to have, please have a microphone. And first of all, congratulations to all of this, to all for this very informative and wonderful event. Hearing as an audience, it was a very, I felt a very informative and very, very useful to have this kind of mitigation water nexus deep dive discussion. As Jennifer introduced, I'm Tamaki Takao. I'm a UNFCCC Secretariat. I'm supporting the work of the Marrakesh Partnership and high-level champions. And as some of you might know, it is an action-oriented topic that is supporting the non-party stakeholders, so non-state actors, action on global climate change across all sectors, especially including water and other nature systems. So in this regard, I do believe that this kind of discussion today, going very, very deep dive into this, what kind of data we need and what kind of action we need to reach the pathways towards long-term goals of the Paris Agreement in terms of this water sector would significantly contribute to the discussion. As this discussion flourished among non-party stakeholders and enhance the collaboration between parties and non-party stakeholders, I believe that it would significantly move the agenda forward. So I look forward for this kind of discussion to further flourish, and I'm looking forward to work together. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tama. Malin, we have one, I would say, final question from the audience. I don't see any other hands, so I think this will be the last from the audience before we go on to the final component.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I am Taru Bahri from the Fisheries and Aquaculture Division of FAO. And I was very excited to see a freshwater event under the UNFCCC program, and this is rather good news. And I had a question about freshwater fisheries, because it seems to me that they're the big absent in this entire landscape. And I was wondering, what's your take on if and where, freshwater fisheries fit in this whole program? Because they're, aquatic food, but they don't belong to agriculture. They, typically in FAO we focus a lot on marine fisheries. So there's always, a bit forgotten, whereas they have a huge importance in terms of food security, especially in the developing countries. So I was wondering whether, you came across this in the analysis you made, and wanted to hear more about this, if there is anything about that. Thanks.
Thank you for that excellent question. Any of the panelists online would like to address that question?
I can briefly address the question. Oh, Noreen, are you?
Oh, you can go ahead.
Okay. So we definitely came across it. We, for example, discussed aquaculture and where to put aquaculture into our division of the different sectors. I agree with you that it's challenging is it agriculture or where can we fit it? So we are hopefully bringing in a case study and we will add that to our land systems chapter, actually, because it is part of the agriculture, and that's where we will put it. But it is a challenge. And Noreen, from your freshwater ecosystems perspective, did you come across any additional insights?
It was not particularly about emission reduction from the fisheries sector that my chapter covers, but it is something in the tangent is like it had in the chapter that we have drafted, we have put much emphasis on the water quality control. The measures are very much embedded in like, nutrient control, organic matter control. And it's like across the board for wetlands, for the rivers, for the lakes, for the reservoirs. And I think it kind of in the tangent of protecting the fisheries as well, but not necessarily about how fishery can contribute or work in a way to for emission reduction. But I'm sure the part that Malene talked about that is coming in the land system chapter might have an insight about it.
Thank you so much, Marie. I think it's very much time for our closing remarks. If it's so, Jen.
Thank you, Malin. Indeed. So we have a final summary statement.
On behalf of SIWI.
A summary statement from the Executive Director of SIWI, Dr. Torgny Holmgren. Go ahead.
On behalf of SIWI, I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers in the audience, both in Bonn and online today, for this important and inspiring event. The presentations here today make it very clear that we need to look at climate mitigation in a completely different way to compare what has traditionally been the case. Only by working with nature and water can we implement mitigation solutions that are powerful enough to tackle the climate crisis. I think that there are two main message takeaways from the meeting today. One is, of course, that water has a much more crucial role in climate mitigation than previously acknowledged. In fact, it's even greater than we expected when we started this journey on this report, I will say, together with BMZ, GIZ, the Potsdam Institute, the Stockholm Resilience Center, and UNDP. And that was more than 2 years ago. At that time, our institutions have come together because we share the same concern that water was forgotten in the climate mitigation debate. On those rare occasions water has been indeed mentioned, it has usually been in discussion about adaptation measures, but water has rarely been seen as relevant to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We know that has been a blind spot. So we decided to gather the latest science on the role of water in climate mitigation and found fast-growing body of research. Now the next step will be to make these insights available to policymakers. This is part of the second major takeaway from today. We can say with more confidence than ever that how we use and manage water could determine if we win the race against climate change. At the Stockholm International Water Institute, we have long advocated for governments to place water at the center of their commitments to an implementation of the Paris Agreement. We know that countries primarily experience the climate crisis in the face of the form of too much or too little water. When global warming alters the water cycle, we can no longer count on predictable rainfall patterns. We must also prepare for more extreme weather. Longer periods of drought and storms and floods that are both more frequent and more damaging than anything we have seen before. Climate-induced changes to the global water cycle aggravates our existing global water crisis, which also caused by rising population, new consumption patterns, changes in land use, and sadly a grave mismanagement of water. Of course also economic development is a part of this. Many countries have already access to less water than they used to, and in many places water is increasingly polluted. The consequences are severe. All sectors of society rely on steady supply of clean water. We need water for food, for energy, household consumption, manufacturing industry, industrial production, etc. Still, many countries base their climate planning on the assumption that they in the future will have water of roughly the same quantity and quality as they have today. But that will not be the case. So this unrealistic assumption could lead to grave miscalculations and counterproductive measures. Countries may opt for policies that require more water than that will be available, or choose solutions that have a dangerous impact on their freshwater resources. We urgently need countries to understand these risks. The IPCC tells us that all sectors of society need to undergo profound transformation before 2030, so that we can halve greenhouse gas emissions by that time. But the transition becomes impossible if water considerations are forgotten in the planning. There is no time for mistakes, and that also means that we need to understand the crucial role of nature. We rely on healthy ecosystems for food, for what we eat, for water we drink, and the air that we breathe. But in many parts of the world, ecosystems are now pushed to the brink of collapse. Water scarcity is a main driver of this degradation of nature, which can turn landscapes from carbon sinks to carbon emitters. New research shows that this is a much greater climate risk than previously assumed. We already see examples, such as where parts of the Amazon rainforest could turn into savanna. IPCC also warned last year that nature's ability to sequester greenhouse gases could be weakening. So far, oceans, wetlands, forests and soils absorb half of the greenhouse gases emitted. We cannot even imagine the consequences if that was no longer the case. Healthy ecosystems sustained by water have been our best allies in the fight against climate change. Now we are at a crossroads. We can choose to continue down the dangerous path where ecosystems are more and more degraded, or we can choose to work with nature and strengthen the ability of ecosystems to protect us. Governments need to understand what is at stake, and they should learn much more about the new generation of climate solutions that they can choose among. As we've heard here today, decision makers have access to a vast array of promising and proven water-related climate policies that can serve to reduce, avoid and capture greenhouse gas emissions. Many of these water for climate solutions work with nature and provide multiple benefits for sustainable development as a whole. And SIWI, we will be carry this message forward to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in November, as well as the landmark UN 2023 Water Conference in New York in March next year. So to conclude, we invite parties and non-party stakeholders alike to implement climate policies, especially those on climate mitigation, with a new transformational approach that is both water, wise and climate smart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Holmgren. We have reached the end of this session. Our report, The Essential Drop to Reach Net Zero, it's planned to be published in the fall of 2022, so it will come in a couple of months. And we will share information on that as soon as we have more details. The executive summary and key messages is available at our website, and you can download it using the QR code that you see now. In the closing, I would like to make sure to thank our partners, GIZ, UNDP, SIWI Water Governance Facility, Stockholm Resilience Center, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. I would also like to extend a special thanks to the over 40 researchers and 25 organizations and universities who have contributed to the content and development of the report. And last but not least, a heartfelt thanks to Jennifer June and the speakers of this session, as well as the people working behind the session. I hope to meet you soon again, perhaps at World Water Week in Stockholm in August. Take care, everyone, and thank you so much.